It is that time of the year when diplomacy is laid bare for the world to see. The fissures, the bickering, the coming together and acting as one on various issues. It is under the cloud of the COVID-19 pandemic that the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly kicked off. And the world woke up to the challenges of COVID-19, climate change and conflict. But will they go beyond their own bickering and move towards resolution of these crises? We shall see.
Unlike the virtual gathering in 2020, this year's event, the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, is being held in a hybrid format, combining both online and offline speeches from world leaders. The deliberations this year focus on challenges including the uneven distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, climate change and global inequalities, and how one impacts the other even more adversely. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, effects of climate change threaten to further escalate problems in regions that are already unstable or in conflict.
COVID and the climate crisis have exposed profound fragilities as societies and as a planet. Yet instead of humility in the face of these epic challenges, we see hubris. Instead of the path of solidarity, we are on a dead end to destruction.
2 decades later,
most countries are walking into the session knowing fully well that they are yet to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, which were derailed because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The pandemic has only made the divide and injustice starker. There are many lessons we can take from the pandemic, from who has been affected and how. Let us be self-aware enough to recognize these failings and to seek racial equality, to close that divide and build the resilience of those who we have sadly left behind.
And that is why
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson urged the world to face climate change and grow up.
it's time for humanity to grow up. It's time for us to listen to the warnings of the scientists. And if you look at COVID, if you want to see an example of the gloomy scientists being proved right, it's time for us to grow up and understand who we are and what we are doing.
But even in the effort to fight these main issues, countries lashed out at each other. Sparks have been flying in the Great Hall of the General Assembly.
The United States remains committed.
President Joe Biden said US will mobilize $100 billion to support climate action in developing nations in his first address to the UNGA. Without naming China, he said the US is not seeking a new Cold War, but would stand up for its allies and friends in the face of aggression.
We are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks. The United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreements in other areas, because we'll all suffer the consequences of our failure.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Chinese President Xi Jinping called for stronger coordination in fighting COVID-19 and practicing true multilateralism in his video message, aiming at US's efforts to continue her hegemonic hold over the world.
China will strive to peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. This requires tremendous hard work, and we will make every effort to meet these goals.
She also announced a new commitment to tackle climate change, that the country would stop building new coal-fired power projects abroad. While many leaders focused on the situation in Afghanistan, the focus of the US is turning to the Indo-Pacific region, which is part of America's strategic competition with China.
Unfortunately, we do have to admit that there was a big failure of the international community after 20 years in Afghanistan. Once, and when I say once, I mean once later, we do have to analyze what kind of mistakes were committed and what kind of bad decisions were made in this regard. But now, Now the main duty is to mitigate the damage. We have to prevent Afghanistan becoming a safe place for terrorist organizations again. We have to strengthen the global fight against terror. And here, United Nations should play an important role.
Interestingly, the new Taliban government has named its first envoy. Kabul has nominated Taliban spokesperson Suhail Shaheen as the next envoy to the UN. But the decision would require clearance from the UN Credentials Committee. Until then, currently accredited ambassador of Afghanistan in the UN is Ghulam Isakzai. On September 15th, he sent a letter to the UN saying that his team will represent Afghanistan in the UNGA session. On September 15th, Afghanistan's new foreign ministry also sent a letter to the UN requesting participation by the representative Suhail Shaheen. Meanwhile, the world is battling another major crisis: vaccine equity, recognizing and honoring vaccine certificates, even as countries like India are battling for recognition. The West is being accused of vaccine racism.
We also need to focus on addressing the pandemic economic effects. To that end, international travel should be made easier through mutual recognition of vaccine certificates.
WHO is urging leaders attending the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly to guarantee equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines and other life-saving tools. Ensure the world is better prepared to respond to future pandemics and renew efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The issue are many at the UNGA. But interestingly, the bodies that raise these issues have been kept out of the building this year: civil society groups and the NGOs.
Then there's
This, even as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced plans to spend more than $900 million over the next 5 years to curb global malnutrition. A move to stem the rise in world hunger during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Our foundation has committed more than $1.8 billion to support the global COVID-19 response. We've also deployed advisors and experts, convened partners, and provided technical assistance around the world. We remain committed to working with all of you to do the work that needs to be done to save lives.
On Wednesday, a coalition of 9 foundations said they would collectively spend $5 billion by 2030 to protect at least 30% of the planet's land and sea. It's one of several pledges private donors made this week as world leaders gather for the annual UNGA. Pledges are being made, but it will take a lot more than annual speeches to walk the talk on clearly defined areas of focus this year: conflict, climate change, and COVID.
A month after the fall of Kabul, Afghanistan's already dilapidated healthcare system is on the brink of crisis. While the world is struggling with how to help the impoverished nation, Afghans are finding it difficult to find 1 square meal a day. This even as the Taliban regime is urging the international community to recognize them.
With the Afghan government severed from international banking system, aid groups both inside Afghanistan and abroad are struggling to get emergency relief, basic services and funds to a population at risk of starvation, unemployment and the coronavirus. Patients at Kabul's government-run Wazir Akbar Khan Hospital are forced to buy life-saving medicine from commercial markets at high prices.
We ask the international community to continue their aid as they used to do in the past. Right now there is security and they won't have any problem even under this government. A patient is a patient. If it was the former regime or the current regime, all the people have economic problems. For example, yesterday I prescribed some medicine to a patient's carer around 10 in the morning. But he didn't have the money to buy the medicine and it took him hours to get the medicine. He finally got it around 10 or 11 at night.
مردمایی که فعلا وضعیت اقتصادیشون خراب است و
People are living in bad financial conditions. They don't have enough money to buy medicines. Therefore, pharmacy owners like me also hesitate to import more medicine. Because on one hand, people can't afford to buy medicine. And on the other hand, we are concerned that the medicines will expire.
Tough economic conditions in Afghanistan have forced some residents in Kabul to put their household belongings up for sale to earn money. In downtown Kabul, an entire street has become a second-hand goods market as people bring belongings such as kitchenware and furniture to sell in order to feed their families.
The actual cost of each piece is around 30 to 40,000 Afghanis. But now we sell them here for 10,000 Afghanis. Prices are so low because there are no jobs and people have no other choice.
With the Taliban takeover, most of Afghanistan's central bank's $9 billion reserves held in the United States have been frozen. IMF has also blocked the $450 million the country was to receive in August. This has caused worsening of poverty conditions in Afghanistan. The unemployment rate, which earlier was more than 30%, is now on the rise. According to the UN, Afghanistan is teetering on the brink of universal poverty, putting 20 years of steady economic gains at risk.
All our cash is at the banks. Thus, there are some problems. Money exchangers want their cash back, but due to some issues which the banks are facing, they cannot pay the cash to money exchangers on time.
Education system is in dire straits. Most schools are shut. Since girls are not permitted to go to co-education schools, they are waiting for all girls schools to be built.
Boys have permission to go to schools and girls for primary schools are allowed, but those in higher classes are not allowed. We request the Taliban to allow female students in higher classes also to go to school.
While some of the institutions have adopted a segregation policy, dividing male and female into two different sections, worries are that many willingly have stopped going to schools and colleges. Boys have also stopped going to school in some cases in show of solidarity with girls not being allowed to come to school. Women made up for a major part of school employees and teaching staff, but many female employees have been ordered to stay home by the country's new rulers.
We are trying to strengthen the cabinet further, and God willing, women will be appointed to certain positions in the necessary sections, and one day we will announce their names here. And in the case of schools, female students, the Ministry of Education is working hard to lay the groundwork for the education of high school girls from 6th to 12th grade as soon as possible. Work is underway on the framework, and it is hoped that this will be done.
The Taliban promises are in vain. The new list of cabinet ministers did not have a single woman leader. The Ministry for Women's Affairs has been replaced with the Ministry of Virtue and Vice.
Now his real-life event inspired a blockbuster film, and he used that fame to speak for rights violations in his own country. That sums up Rwanda's Paul Rusesabagina's story. But fate had a different story to tell, and today that hero has turned a convict in his own country, brandished as the mastermind of a terror group. Real certainly differs from real life.
The man who inspired 2004 Hollywood blockbuster Hotel Rwanda, Paul Rusesabagina, has been found guilty of terror-related offences by a court in Kigali. The 67-year-old one-time hotel manager, portrayed as a hero in the film about the 1994 genocide, was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Rusesabagina is guilty of being a member of terror group and participating in terror activities. The court finds that they should be found guilty for being part of this terror group, MRCD-FLN. They attacked people in their homes, they attacked people in their cars, or even on the road traveling.
After being portrayed by actor Don Cheadle as the hero of the 2004 film Hotel Rwanda, Rusesabagina emerged as a prominent critic of Rwanda President Paul Kagame. He had denied all the charges and boycotted court proceedings and final hearing.
The verdict does not come as a surprise to us because it is what we expected from the beginning since our father was kidnapped. One cannot kidnap someone and be expected to give him a fair trial. So we expected the worst. So that's exactly what we expected.
He has hypertension. He has cancer in remission. He has cardiovascular diseases, and he was held in solitary confinement for more than is legally permitted. He was tortured. So his health is our biggest concern. He's a 67-year-old man. So we really hope that the Rwandan government will not hurt him. But we are very, very scared for his life.
The court ruling comes more than a year after Rusesabagina vanished during a visit to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. He reappeared days later in Rwanda in handcuffs, accused of supporting the armed wing of his opposition political platform, the Rwandan Movement for Democratic Change. But the court ruled that he wasn't kidnapped when he was tricked into boarding a chartered flight. Rwanda's government asserted that at the time he was going to Burundi to coordinate with armed groups based there and in Congo.
There's a kind of an outcry and a claim that there was a miscarriage of justice, that this was a foregone conclusion, that the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, was going to be determined to silence one of his main political enemies. Well, there may be some validity to that, but I mean, the larger truth is that all the evidence shows that Rusesabagina is guilty.
The armed group claimed some responsibility for attacks in 2018 and 2019 in southern Rwanda, in which 9 Rwandans were killed. Rusesabagina testified at the trial that he helped to form the armed group to help refugees, but said he never supported violence. The US resident and Belgian citizen Paul Rusesabagina was convicted on 8 charges, including membership in a terrorist group, murder and abduction.
We have a month to appeal, so I hope that during this month, either there will be a transfer and his trial will take place here in Brussels, which I think is the best solution.
Paul Rusesabagina is credited with saving more than 1,000 people by sheltering them at the hotel he managed during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. More than 8 lakh Tutsi and Hutus were killed in the 100 days of civil war by armed militia. Post nearly $34 million box office success of the film, Rusesabagina used his fame to highlight what he described as rights violations by the government of Kagame. The current president of Rwanda is a Tutsi rebel commander who took power after his forces captured Kigali and halted the genocide.
In World at a Glance this week, we'll take a look at all the elections that took place across the world.
Canadians gave Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party a victory in parliamentary elections, but his gamble to win a majority of seats failed and nearly mirrored the result of 2 years ago. While minority governments are common in Canada, coalitions are extremely rare, and Justin Trudeau will need to compromise with opposition parties to pass legislation. Chanting the name of Russian president, the country's ruling United Russia Party celebrated its victory in the parliamentary elections. The election lacked significant opposition presence after the authorities declared organizations linked to imprisoned Alexei Navalny, the Kremlin's most prominent foe, to be extremist. The voting was also marred by numerous reports of violations, including ballot stuffing. Philippine boxing icon and Senator Manny Pacquiao announced that he will run for president in the 2022 elections. Pacquiao accepted the nomination of his LDP Laban party at its national convention, pledging to serve the Filipino people. Another prominent face to join the race is the popular mayor of the Philippine capital Manila, Isko Moreno. Once a child scavenger, before becoming an actor, then entering politics, the Manila mayor told the press that he would fight still raging coronavirus outbreaks and long-entrenched poverty and promote democracy if he triumphs in the May 9th elections.
That's all in this edition of World Today. But before I say goodbye from Washington, D.C., I leave you with visuals of this tightrope star who stunned the world with his Eiffel Tower walk. A French daredevil wowed crowds in the center of Paris by walking 600 meters on a tightrope between the Eiffel Tower and the Trocadero Square. Nathan Pollard, a famous tightrope artist, relied on a narrow strip of rope just 2.5 centimeters wide to keep him safe. Watch the visuals and have fun.